Hello everybody and welcome to the show. I've got Patrick Dixon back and we're going to talk some spiritual science and Anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner and see where else it takes us. But this day that we're recording it, in the newspapers was all the articles about Elon Musk and his little chip that he put into the first human. Transhumanism has started. So Patrick, welcome to the show. And what's happening with transhumanism and Elon Musk and the chip?
Well, I think one has to, first you have to acknowledge that actually, in a sense, it is brilliant. It is an example of scientific based in materialism, absolutely brilliant that they can actually put something into the human brain, even just brain surgery, and which will enable certain connections to be made to think in a certain way. And in a way, from a sort of biblical point of view, you can say, yes, this is one of the signs and wonders of the beast. What one means by that is that it comes under the dome, you could say, of materialism. It wouldn't have arisen had not the world been encased, incarcerated in a materialistic world conception, where it's not so much that it's wrong, but it's that this idea of transhumanism only arises because there's no other way to go. There's no other place to go. This is really the inevitability of materialism and what will happen with it when the human being would be replaced by external mechanistic or electronic parts. If there is no other way, and that way has been denied, in a sense, theoretically, by the mainstream modern science. I always say this is, and physics believes, you get this sense that it believes itself to be the sort of supreme science. The reason for that is that the physicists say they're dealing with what is really permanent, the everlasting matrix of matter that they talk about, the standard model of the subatomic particles. These and the four fundamental forces. Everything else is transitory. Consciousness, life, meaning, culture, connections with human beings, love, emotions, all those things are really transitory. And they are squeezed, being pincered, as I talk at the Ahriman's pincer, between, on the one hand, astrophysics, which has determined the distant future. It's fixed it, that's what it is, that's it. We know when the universe is going to collapse. As I said this before, they calculate that the Earth will end in 4 billion years. That's one end, that's the astrocosmic barrier, limit upon which the Ahrimanic forces trap our thinking. The other end is particle physics, the permanency of this, the only thing that's going to last, and it's the only thing it's going to return to, are the fundamental particles connected with the four fundamental forces: electromagnetism, nuclear energy, the weak force, and gravity. And of course this is the great prison in which human consciousness, without knowing it, is actually being trapped. And why one should counter transhumanism, one can see its inevitability. One doesn't deny Ahriman is extremely clever, brilliant, but it's also not in tune with the full manifestation of human. It overrides and, in a sense, denies the true, slow, growing, evolutionary potential of the Earth and all the human beings upon it. That's the real problem. And that to teach and what can be done to develop these faculties, you first of all got to accept that the human being has a soul, you could say. What is that? You could say the soul is really the resonant chamber which contains within it all the memories of the entity through several incarnations, all its journeys out of the body and back into body. That's what the soul has. People can feel the soul. Very few people can really go into it, submerge themselves in it, and then rise out with new riches. That's, to a certain extent, mysticism, which a lot of great artists have. You plumb the depths of cosmic and earthly memories, and you can then forge out of that new manifestations. But in a society, in a cosmology that denies, or is beginning to deny, the idea of the soul, because if there's no life after death, there's no reincarnation, which I can saw the main conceptual materialist state. That's their dogma, basically. They think they've got the whole picture, and that picture they've got denies any of these potentials within the human being. And that's where, so they're then forced, inevitably, they've made their own prison, and the only way out is to enhance a human being with technology. That's their way to what they believe is the only journey towards immortality. Paired with that, you could say that's connected more with the particle physics end. You've got the space program. What they're searching for is God in the void that their minds have already projected out. And one of the things one has to say, and this is very controversial and it will take a long time to be realized, is that nearly all the phenomena that they're looking at through their telescopes, through their enhanced technological instruments, and they're seeing as objective manifestations of the supermateriality of the universe, are actually images of what the human ego and human consciousness on the earth and their science is doing to the inner life of humanity. It's an outer manifestation. It's like they're looking at dark matter. There is a connection between dark matter and all those souls on the earth who are total subscribers to materialism, because then they've darkened their bodies. They've made them not vehicles for the transformation, not vehicles that can receive divine wisdom and therefore begin the gradual process. So they're walking around, and then when they die, they take that darkened materialism across the threshold, and that appears, this is very controversial, as what they're calling dark matter and dark energy, even black holes. I mean, all these are connected with consciousness positions of human beings. And what's interesting about that is that, in this sort of, all the great spiritual teachings speak, when you cross the threshold after death, you move gradually from a localized consciousness on the earth to becoming, in a way, a universal force. You become something that is affecting the universe, and which will have its reflection back on the earth. So that's what is being projected out, and materialism is shining back. It's even our ideas of what the sun is. The sun is a thermonuclear furnace. This is all to do with the idea that this being Ahriman, who is the inspirer of materialism, is to him, to this being, the sun is a blazing inferno of cosmic wisdom that burns his intentions. Therefore, in the mind of human beings who he's inspiring, it becomes a physical burning inferno. And I mean, it isn't that. I mean, the whole idea of the generation of heat and light and warmth, heat are what we call physical heat and physical light, are really a manifestation of the first fall, the separation of soul light, spirit light and soul warmth. And that was the activity of Lucifer, the first severance of our being when we're incarnated from the cosmos. In Ahriman it's taken deeper, it's taken further, because light is then trapped down and becomes synonymous with the electromagnetic spectrum. It's not the same. Real light is not that. Original light is cosmic wisdom. The sun is really a conduit through which the wisdom of the whole solar system and the stars, the zodiac, flows into the earth. In a materialistic world, in this fallen state which the Luciferic beings have also brought down into the world of organism, it becomes what we call physical heat. Only when the sun's emanation touches the earth, or anything to do with the earth, it becomes physical heat. But it isn't really that, it's much more than that. And when of course, if you take a spacecraft out, you will feel heat, because it's coming from earth materials and even the physical body. So this is where we have to see that we have to really get a nuanced perception. We see all these pictures of the planets, on the internet, all kinds of fancy. But in a way, we'll never see them like that. One has to distinguish in this real cosmology, which acknowledges planets, but also acknowledges the spheres, which are the spheres inscribed by the orbits of each of the planets, which is what we pass through after death. I always say this, all of us are really cosmonauts. Or
Oh, oh, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. I always find it quite interesting that the spaceships and the astronauts, like the spaceships have a gold lining on them, and it's like against like, isn't it? Because it's protecting it from the sun.
Yeah,
Maybe you can
yeah.
comment on that. Or that the cosmonauts or the astronauts, they have gold across their visors, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, well, of course, I mean, the whole thing about protection, the further out you go into the space in that way, the more protection you need. I mean, it's well known that actually space travel, working in space, is not good for the human body. It's, you know, the bones start to dissolve. It's a kind of thing that's projected out, premature. You know, it's a materialistic way of both. It's got both Aram and Lucifer, and it's escaping, and it's searching for something. There's a sort of desire to find something which you've already denied. You know, I mean, it's curious. I mean, talk about these exoplanets. Said it loads of times. You know, that stars are distant. Even this physicist was saying, I watched a lecture, and he said, you know, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your great-great-great-great will never get to the stars, according to the distances that mainstream astronomy has ascribed to them, because the nearest is 4 light years away. You calculate that. You have to calculate the how many seconds there are in a day, then you multiply that by 365, then you multiply that by 4, and you get a very large number of seconds. But in each one of those seconds, you've got 186,000 miles, according, and that puts the distance of the nearest star, Proxima Centauri, to be about, well, over 14 trillion miles, which would take thousands of years to get there. You know, so I mean, you just know that this is not the way. This is, you know, whereas another alternative, or I think a true cosmology, which doesn't deny this, doesn't deny it's saying it's brilliant stuff, but it's not the true direction, and it would take us away from our true evolutionary path. So we have to get a really clearer sense of what can be, what is being done, and to a certain extent, the high levels of enthusiasm for all this stuff of the materialistic space stuff and all the stuff at CERN has to be dethroned, to a certain extent deflated, because it's being taught as a kind of possibility, a dream to everybody, to schools and kids that want to be astronauts. It's not a real direction. It's very, very seductive. First of all, you undermine meaning. You say there's no meaning here. You know, it's all chaos. We look what we're doing with the Earth. Oh, well, we can escape. We can make our bodies immortal. Well, you know, because we just experience death and decay. We don't understand. And that's why we need a higher cosmology. I mean, it's almost like, you know, the present materialism is like a seed, a dried seed, which they take to be the complete picture. What has to happen to that seed? It has to die, it has to open, it has to be moistened so it can grow beyond it. Or it has to be like a flower that is fertilized from above by an insect from another dimension. Then it will grow into something which is way beyond anything that exists now. I mean, I always say this, the greater cosmology is infinitely greater and more mysterious in the best possible way than scientific materialism, which is huge quantitatively. But it's dependent on vast technologies that calculate. And no human being can do those calculations. That's what it's removing it from the human mind, which has other faculties and other potentials which are quite different. So, I mean, that's talking about AI and something like I've always said this, that what happens there is, that's with all this technology, hundreds, if not thousands of human beings have invested their consciousness into this, what I call horizontalizing of thought, binding it down, not having any concern about the cosmic wisdom. And then they've externalized it in devices. So you've got these machines, things like DeepMind, and people say, wow, it may calculate, or quantum computers. Of course it can, because it's thousands and thousands of people's thought, enabling them to do that. And then they worship it. They're sort of worshipping themselves, externalized as a group. And they are, in a sense, though many not consciousness, as a spiritual group, they are an enemy. They are a spiritual enemy. They're connected with this idea of, in the Bible it talks about the prophets of Baal, who Elijah fought against, which is a similar thing. And in another way, there's two figures of witnesses. You get Moses, and Moses had to fight against the Egyptian, which had become decadent, which is what's happening now. The development of science was a spiritual thing. A lot of early science was founded also on the work that was done in the monasteries of Christianity, the development of consciousness. But then, in the so-called Enlightenment, where a lot of all the ancient archetypes of the creation, which have been held down as the hierarchies withdrew to give us independence, were allowed to come up to the surface. That was because of the mystery of Golgotha, the descent into hell, and the rising up. So they became available, which were memories of incredible processes, which were, but with that also came the great denier. This Ahrimanic being is saying, this is all mine, this is my inventions, where actually it's not. It's the memories of the cosmic activities that fell into his grip and grasp, and he only has the past. And that's also coincides to a certain extent with the idea that nearly all our technology is based on fossil fuels. It's based on the past. Even electricity is, in a sense, fossilized light. It's descended. Whereas now what's happening is that we're lifting our technological activities more into the present, hence the renewables, which are a transitional stage, things that are actually here now in nature, which of course, to a certain extent existed earlier, where you have sailing ships using the air, windmills, you had, even hydroelectricity is one thing, but then the idea that most of the materials that are around us are compounded in ways connected, which you don't find in nature, the way they're connected. It's like they connect them in a way which shuts out nature. So a lot of our technology, like rockets and all these things, they've done things to metals which does not happen in the natural, normal process of the Earth. And that is to defend themselves when they go into space from the cosmic forces, which are hostile to Ahriman. That's why it's so difficult. They won't let Ahriman cross certain thresholds. So that's why, as you go out, you have to get more and more defensive. So.
Oh, right, okay. I hadn't thought of it like that, because I was going to say, surely we're not supposed to be, as humans, going out into space anyway, because our work's here on this Earth. And when you started talking about working with the different technologies, we need to be working with the planet, not against it, which is one of the big problems, obviously, of the last 100 or so years. Yeah.
Well, it coincides, the whole way we work with it coincides the way we thought about it, the way we think about it, because the idea, what I call conceptual materialism arises, with all these beings who deny any kind of divine purpose. This is the separation from the church, which had to happen in a way, but it hardens more and more and more, and it forces us into, there's nothing up there, so there must be everything down there, we must get out, and that is, then we start mining, the whole thing about quarrying and mining, which is extraordinary level happens today to process materials. Even to get a mobile phone takes enormously complex processes all over the world to bring something together like that. And that's not, and that is a brilliant thing, but it is sub-nature. And what one means by that, what we're living off is the capital of the past. And that's going to run out. We have to bring in, we're now moving into the present with the renewables, but then we must lift into the future. And that's really where this thing Technosophy comes in.
Could you explain Technosophy? Because not everybody understands what that actually is.
Yeah, well, it's a very, very difficult thing, and it's only really, at the moment, I was saying to somebody the other day, at the moment it only exists in the realm of human thought. It's not yet something manifest in the physical world. I mean, what it would do, to a certain extent, it imitate on a higher level, a human level, in this way, what happens in plants. Plants bring down from the superstance world into substance, and they take substances up into the superstance or superstantial world. So really, in Technosophy, which in contradistinction to technology, which is a lot to do with fire-based, which is to go with the cosmology, it's fire-based, it's explosions, it's collisions. I mean, even the way they talk about the solar system is formed basically through collisions, explosive, which assumes that the solar system started with sort of hard materials, bashing into each other, which is, of course, a dead mineral picture. It's a transformation of what I call mineral consciousness. And whereas one could look at the solar system far more superorganically, and anthroposophists have said that in a way, embryogenesis is an image on the microcosmic level of how the solar system is a superorganic, a living. That's the difference. It comes back to this great polarization between thingness and beingness. In ancient times, human beings lived in this sense of beingness. Many of the indigenous people still hold to this idea that the earth is a living being. Mainstream science at the moment, with exceptions, defines the universe and the earth and us as really things. We're not. There's no inner thing within us. That's the great, and that thingness, also connected with what we've been doing in the study group, is like the object world. Everything's frozen into separated objects, and therefore in that comes competition, comes collision, comes all those things. We pass through it because our ego is also, to a certain extent, an objective reality given us by the spirits of form. Of course, this is completely foreign to modern science, modern thinking, but it won't be in the future. The idea of the ego, we have to get to this separation, but then not see the ego as a stone with which we bash others or throw, but rather as a seed through which we grow into higher communion. And that's the whole difference. So if materialism is seen as the seeds of something greater, that's its redemption, where it will open up and send out the leaves of, an open, imaginative consciousness.
We was talking earlier also about the sun, and you were saying about the sun wisdom coming through, which in olden times would be part of the sun mysteries and the kings, like the sun kings, like Christ is the sun king, Mithras is the sun king. So we still should be trying to connect with the sun when we're doing this kind of anthroposophical work. Can you elaborate more on what the sun should be, or what our interaction with the sun should be?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the sun, like everything else, has a massive biography. I mean, there was a time, if one talks about the descent of the divine, which went through all the zodiac, we talked a bit about the 12 philosophical systems, that descended through the zodiac into incarnation. But for a certain amount of time, this being stayed within the sun. And this was why a lot of cultures worshipped the sun without knowing. They hadn't got the name that we have now, but they worshipped the sun. Egypt was very example. But then it was realized by the beginning of the Hebrew stream through Moses that the sun was now this being that dwelt within the sun as we see it, now separated. It had to come down to earth, carrying the spirit of the sun to the earth. This is about the whole incarnation. The whole Judaic stream, its highest purpose was to bring the sun and the ego and the immortality of the ego through the stream towards the incarnation. But then what's the sun then? The sun that's not, the sun then becomes the indwelling place for certain spiritual beings. Though, I mean, and of course after death, of course this is where it gets difficult, because anthroposophical cosmology, which I hold to be the truest and most holistic, sees that these planets of the solar system and the spheres of them, the orbits, are places or states that we pass through after death, which have, and we unload certain things in them, which are then processed, and then we go further on, and then on the way back we're given new powers to transmute those experiences and states to renew the earth. It's a very complex thing. The sun is now a portal through which incarnating and excarnating souls go. The divine being is now permanently united with the purpose of the earth, but one cannot put limits on that being, because that being is also the Lord of Karma, which means it guides or hands over human beings with its own power, other beings to carry us through. Even the being of Lucifer, which on the earth has a very negative effect to a certain extent, has a legitimate task on other levels. So, and of course this is very complex, but it's complex in a living way. It's quite different from the abstract, arid complications of modern science, modern physics, which has nothing to say to the human being, individual. It is actually, ultimately, what in the Bible you call the abomination of desolation, because it preaches nothing but death, really. But I've often said this, the people who are the priests, the high priests of this, they live in a semi-schizoid state, because they have these ideas in their heads, but they don't realize the effect it's having on their being. And they often, when they get older, they start to feel, wow. So because it's got built into it a kind of nihilism, an existential nihilism. And if that really took hold of you, you couldn't get up in the morning. It's like that's so, that's the sort of problem, is and you're living off, what they're doing is, people are really convinced materialists. They're living off the soul capital of the past. And, well, in the biblical sense again, one doesn't want to be too scary, but they're actually living, it's connected with this statement, and she shall be drunk with the blood of the saints. And what that means is that all those human beings that have struggled spiritually in all kinds of levels throughout the history of the world, whether they're teachers, whether they're artists, monks, whatever they are, that comes to this present, that is a huge spiritual reservoir which is available on the earth to also. But this whore of Babylon idea is that she takes all that and covers herself, smears it all over herself as though it's her property. And then she adulterates it. So you get this from a very simple example, people using, great Beethoven or something, or Bach, to use as advertised stuff. So it's all becomes enslaved to materialism, rather than understanding that it's actually something that helps the transformation and evolution of the human being. So, yeah.
Because I see a lot of that kind of thing actually in TV programs when they try to rationalise, I don't know, somebody, just off the top of my head, Julian of Norwich or Hildegard of Bingham, de Bingham. So they are still even trying to do that now with our saints and with our spirituality. They always want to rationalise everything.
Oh yeah, I mean they want to explain it away in terms of that thing. I mean it's so, you get so much. I mean, for instance, you get people who are called sort of professors of Christianity. They're not Christians, but they're just, and one has to say to them, you can't understand it unless you're inside it. Then it becomes infinite, but you're just looking at it as an object from the outside. It's just an abstraction. It's interesting. There's so many ways you can look at nature, and you can see the way, animals and plants take in substances. I mean, the interesting thing is that the fungi, unusually, goes inside its food and then digests it from the inside out, whereas, most creatures put the food inside them. And, so it's like all these kind of things are images of the way spiritual beings work and the way aspects of our own soul. Spiders, how do they do it? They inject their digestive juices into the creature and they just wait for it to be. So it's quite, they're all different, but they all are, in a way, fallen organic images of higher, deeper volcanic processes. It could be said, in some ways, that we are actually not consumed, but consummated by the higher worlds. It's a kind of higher digestion. We're taken up, but we're allowed, through the divine process of incarnation and resurrection, one part of our being still maintains its integral form, but the other parts are taken away. They're broken down, they're built up again, so we pick them up again. So it's, if one studied the human being, in the deepest sense, you would understand all the processes of the universe. Or, God say, if you understood the 3 years of the divine being on the earth, you would get access to all knowledge. It's like what we were saying before, when you focus on one thing, it's what I call metaphormosis, enough, it can lead you through that eye of the needle to the vastness of the universe. So it's an artistic way of looking at the world too.
I have to agree with you about the Christian theologians and other theologians. I did my degree in divinity, and I remember one of my teachers saying to me, oh, you've come here thinking you're doing this degree to find God. You're not going to find God through this degree. And I realised, yes, he was coming from a rationalistic, method type of study, but some of my other teachers were looking at the deeper implications of it. But they were few and rare. But that degree did help me to continue with my soul spiritual path, because the Gospels or any of this kind of work that we're doing, including Rudolf Steiner, showing us that there is something deeper. As you said, them 3 years of the Christ, if you understand them deeply and fully, you get a better understanding of who you are and why you're here on this planet and what our mission is.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, that life and the meaning of that is something that I feel so connected with, but also I feel hesitant, because it's almost like if you really open it out, you become a target. I mean, which may be inevitable, maybe it has to happen, but I mean, it's to understand. I mean, for instance, the healing throughout those 3 1/3 years, when that divine being, distinguish it from just Jesus of Nazareth, the Christ is in every human being on the earth has something in them deep within their being, which is a living, immortal response to what was going on in those. They didn't know it, but they were part of their being, below their level of consciousness and above their level of consciousness, were experiencing. Like, for instance, and also all those particular souls that were healed, whether they were, they were blind, or they couldn't walk, or they were possessed by devils, or they were even dead. There's a group of souls who have such an incredible mark within their being, which will appear as tremendous faculties in incarnations, in the future, particularly. Like, for instance, you could take the man born blind might come as a great seer who reveals the mysteries of vision and light, so, and all of them will have a very specific, and in a way all of us are uniquely connected. Whether we were just being born, whether we had just died, what age we were, all that will be hidden deep within our astral bodies, within our souls, and at some point will come out. And it'd be good to be able to identify it as well. And there are so many mysteries connected with that. And for instance, when the divine being was walking around, it's completely unknown to mainstream theology or any of it, even anthroposophy. There was a synchronicity with the zodiac, so that if that being had to heal, and he knew that a certain being would be in a certain place, he would put himself in a position where forces could flow straight through his body into that, so because what he was doing was reliving the primary creation of the human archetype, from the 12 directions of space. So maybe a person was lame, he'd move into Pisces and Aquarius and have that, and that would go into the. So those mysteries will get more and more and more, and that will also work into future medicine, where it's where where you are, like feng shui on a higher level, where you're position the body at certain times of the day. Certain forces will flow in and out, so. It's vast, it's infinite, but that being is both the point that is created from the widest, profoundest periphery of time and space.
Well, I've been discussing with someone recently, which I hope relates to what you've just said. We were talking about the 4 points of sunset, sunrise, midday, midnight, and how midday, midnight are related to Lucifer and Ahriman, and sunrise is related to Pisces, which would be the Christ, and sunset would be related to Mary the Virgin, Virgo. Yeah. So aligning ourselves with certain energies, like what you're just saying, and obviously Christ was attuned to all 12, which is why he was able to work with them, but we can help ourselves by perhaps, meditating in the morning and the evening, and not at midday and midnight, as most occultists used to do, because their midday and midnight are more for Lucifer and Ahriman.
Yeah, Steiner speaks about this idea that different times, it was valid to work in certain ways. Like now, we have to work even in our science and technology, we're more from the Pisces Virgo, whereas we were working very much with the Gemini Sagittarius, because the Gemini is mathematism, and Sagittarius is monadism, which is like also this polarity between the division, both sides in the Gemini, and the one-sided focus, single-minded, which is a valid thing, but whereas the Pisces Virgo, with more emphasis on the nuance of the feminine, it's more holistic. So it's not this, we've got a rocket we're sending straight, it's what is the Earth is, well it's feeling, so it comes back to Technosophy. It's connected with making the Earth more and more and more a receptacle of inspired cosmic wisdom, rather than hurling, Ahrimanic, intellectually devised entities into space, searching for something that you've already decided is too distant. Whereas making the Earth is to a certain extent, a feminine modality. It's Sophia, which is the next manifestation on a higher level of the Earth Mother, which is bringing in these four, and it will be very deep, profound thoughts about shapes and forms. One idea is that the shape of a container will more and more be connected with transforming the substance that is within it. So, and it's also connected to loosely with, what Sheldrake talked about, beginning, which is the morphogenic fields, form fields, which become dynamic. They're not just forms stuck in forms, but they're forms that shape. I talk about the periodic table. It's rather like a giant keyboard of an instrument, that every single element is like a note with a particular frequency. And that's lifting that into absolute living music, which will reactivate the music of the spheres. So we will start to become a new sound, a new music. Whereas at the moment we're a planet of noise, basically. And that's
cacophony.
Yeah.
And it's Rupert Sheldrake you were saying there when you were saying about Sheldrake, just for those that need to look him up, definitely, his work's fantastic. But that's quite interesting, because Steiner says that spiritual science, I'm obviously paraphrasing here, needs to be a musical way of promoting it or putting it forward would be ideal.
Absolutely. I think, art in general, drama, poetry, music, which really manifests its activity of wisdom. It's not just a dried up theory, it's acting out and acting in those principles which will inspire and open up and give hope and meaning. Materialism is really a hopeless thing. That's why people fall into transhumanism, because they believe that that's the only hope we have. Upload my consciousness on a computer and implant my body and get out, find new planets. So, and the answer has to be, first of all, to confirm the idea of immortality, which will start, the veil will start to lift. And there are many children now being born or remembering previous lives, and on the one hand, then you've got all these people having near-death experiences. Famous scientist, I can't remember his name, neurologist.
Yeah, I knew him actually. I met him a few times out in America. He has sadly passed on now, and someone else has taken over his work, so it is continuing.
Yeah. The guy who had a sort of thing with a meningitis type thing, wasn't it? He gave lots of talks about it. He crossed the threshold. He was a scientist, a neurologist, I think.
Yes, he was a neurologist. We are thinking of the same person. Yes, because a lot more people have started doing, or scientists and universities are looking more into his work. So that is fantastic that that's being expanded on, and people are becoming more and more aware that reincarnation is a real thing, and people do keep coming back. But is this what's stopping perhaps some people wanting to, I'm doing die in quotation marks, and so they're going for the transhumanism role of downloading their consciousness and living forever that way?
They're being deluded by the possibility of the kind of shortcut that they can get this, but and that's related to the idea that you can develop knowledge without any kind of morality. And of course, that is the position in mainstream science. It doesn't matter what your behavior on one level is like. It's and that you've got the machines. You don't need to develop this new kind of state of consciousness which will open you up. I mean, that's what was being forgotten. Of course, that was manifest in the monasteries. The first, that you had to go through there was a correlation between the prayer, the monastic life, transformation of the senses, and a vehicle which would enable them to, write and keep the knowledge going. They had to have this quiet life. They had to overcome their astral deviations before they had the vehicle to be those who could preserve the knowledge until a new manifestation appeared. That's on all the spiritual paths. If you want to reach other levels, you've got to train yourself away from all those forces that tempt you.
Because I find it quite interesting that when I write, because I'm a writer, I've written books, but I have to write the books by hand first. Because I find if I put them straight, and I've done a couple straight into the keyboard, I don't remember writing them. It's quite peculiar.
Yeah, that's fair. It's quite understandable. I mean, I, at the moment, mostly write nearly all by hand. And my method is partly to have a huge sheet of paper. I'm writing sort of drama, so it's like a storyboard. So I can see the whole thing in panoramic view. But, it's definitely affects you if you just use computers and things like that. I'm not saying you shouldn't. Obviously, we have to make it accessible. This is where you have to work with the Aramanic, but you not get worked over by it.
Well, that's the important thing. That's what Steiner said, wasn't it? We work with it. It doesn't control us. We don't get ruled by it. It doesn't dominate our lives. We should be, it should be working with us, for us. But what would be the karmic implications of all this?
How do you mean?
For example, say Elon Musk put in the chip in that gentleman that he's put it in, and I understand why that man's had it put in. He I don't know if you know this, but he was someone that couldn't move his arms and legs. I'm not sure if he was a full paraplegic. I can never say paraplegic.
Yeah.
So for that must be fantastic. I'd see the point of that to help that man. I don't know if that does affect his karma or not, or whether that is part of his karma and helps to develop for other people. I know I was very upset when I saw Musk putting the chip in the pig and the monkey, and he's like, them poor animals. So that's going to have a karmic effect on Elon Musk himself.
Yeah.
But I suppose for what is the karmic effect of all this on people like that, or even people that need it, like the man that's paralysed? And what about people that have it just to be part of the neural link that's come in?
Yeah, the trouble is, it can encourage this incredible sort of passivity. I mean, obviously, it has its virtue, and it's only the divine that allows Ahriman to do these things in a kind of merciful generosity, that this is possible. But if you think that's the only way, that's where it becomes dangerous. There's a line you start to cross, and even though you might be able to see, or you might be able to do things, they won't be quite the same as they were when it was completely natural, and that. But the counter to it is to develop, or gratitude that you can do, but also to work to develop new concepts of your own vision. If you can do an equal amount of work on the self as that's been done through the technology, you will redeem it. But the danger is that it can make people too dependent, in a certain way. Ahriman wants that. He wants that kind of. He wants to be seen as God. So this is a miracle in a way, but it's not the same as the miracles of the divine, which are coming out of the future.
Because Christ is always coming to us, isn't he? From the future, where he is. He's coming to those that are willing to hear, those with ears to hear, and such like. Maybe you could explain that, because I had a few people asking me about, well, what is Christ doing in the etheric, and why is he coming from the future, or not coming, but sending?
Yeah.
I'm not even sure what to say. Sending what?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because that looks at the whole transcendental thing about the so-called Trinity. This idea that a being dwells in the now, in a way you can say Christ is both at the end of this cycle of the earth, but also present. So the end of the world of this circle is with us right now. It's around us. I mean, this is the, obviously you're dealing with the greatest levels of knowledge of the most high beyond in anthroposophy. I mean, the idea of a being that is both, I shall be with you even unto the ending of the world, which is man saying, I shall be with you, and with me, and I, all around you will be the world, the end of the world conditions, working on your present, drawing you towards your future. I was just saying earlier, that in a way, old age, when you get less physical movement, you kind of shrink in a way, is really, can be seen as the launching pad of your cosmic, because you have to be still. Something has to be fixed before you can launch. It has to have that structure, and that's what Ahriman has imitated in the space thing. So when you are old, you are stilling, your movements being stilled, so that you can let go the inner thing into movement. So all the movement goes into the excarnating process, and the more you understand that, you're beginning the redemption of old age, and that is also this mystery of the Christ being with us now, but also being in the future. He's drawing us towards the future state of our being through time, through growing old, through all the changes we make. And this idea also that no one cometh unto the Father but by me, which means you cannot reach the ultimate knowledge of the universe without going through the mystery of the heart, the true, that's the mystery of love. But also, I play with words here, but there is meaning in this. The Father, F-A-R-T-H-E-R, he says, your Father that is in heaven, means that being that is beyond you now, which is also you, is also drawing your future incarnations, to a certain extent, drawing you onwards. So it's leaving behind your body, slowing down as your ether body is moving out and all the higher. So great mysteries about time, how time works, are connected in these profound mysteries. And the more you read into the Bible, you can see in these incredible mystical processes. I mean, there is in the book of Revelation, I was often to chapter 11, speaks about the two. It's the way words have double meanings. Like it says, I shall charge my two witnesses, and then it says, these have the power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the day of their testimony. The whole, and it says, these shall stand before the God of the whole earth. And that has several meanings. They shall stand before Christ comes. They shall stand before Ahriman in space. And so that these sort of processes that, so the God of the whole earth is both Christ and Ahriman, slightly different, but said, the one sentence is said, but it has two meanings, that.
That sounds quite blasphemous, but
well,
sure
no, it's not
yeah.
really. I mean, it means God of the whole earth, the one they stand before in time. That's what they're prophets. They have to lay the foundations prepare humanity in a better state to receive that. But they also stand before in space, the Ahriman. That's why, they get martyred, because they actually stand in direct opposition to the Ahrimanic purpose, which is all around us. That's the God of this world. This is interesting. The divine being is here, in this world where we're surrounded by the Ahrimanic. And that's part of the great pain that was experienced in Gethsemane. Gethsemane was a prophetic experience of all the stages and states the human soul would go through to the end of the world evolution. And this being was identified with that. So it's more, the crucifixion was a very physical suffering in a way. But he could only bear that because he'd actually experienced something much more profound, actually in Gethsemane. And then of course the descent into hell and all those elements, which of course, from my point of view, I'm writing stuff to go out in the world, but where I'm talking now, where I'm thinking now, it makes it more and more difficult, because what I'm speaking about is so far from, what's normally acceptable and understandable.
Because the Garden of Gethsemane, that's when Christ was arrested, correct? So Peter has his little incident of cutting off a soldier's ear. Judas was obviously giving him away, giving Christ away, and got his 30 pieces of silver. So there's a lot going on there of, you know, if we're looking at it from a deeper point of view of how we can be traitors, to Christ or to ourselves. We can deny the Christ.
Absolutely. I mean, it really was just before all that happened, you know, when he realized all was asleep. They were all asleep. Mm-hmm. And that moment was probably the loneliest moment ever, you know, because no one understands, no one knows what I've got to do. You know, he said, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. You know, that was, because it was a spiritual premonition, not just of the crucifixion, but of what he had to go through, and the whole future of the planet, which was united with that. You know. So it's to try and understand that, imagine that, if we can really do that, we gain knowledge into what all human experiences, which are small echoes and replays of that all the time. But, you know, all the stations of the cross, with the whole thing. And
which there was 12 of, so again perhaps related to the zodiac. I think there was 12 stations of the cross.
And then one of the most profound was the descent into hell, and what that meant, what that did to the world, what that did to the future of the earth and culture, all those aspects. And of course now I'm talking about stuff which I know in the deepest level of my being is true, but there's a part of my being that wants to disguise it, because, you know, I want to succeed in the world as an artist. And of course these thoughts have shut off that possibility for a long time. It may be that you've got to trust and take the chance and put them out, and that's what has to happen. But it's a big point to get to, because you know that famous statement, the world hated me before it hated you. And there is, to a certain extent, it goes back to this mystery of Palm Sunday, you know, because there are all these people, because they think, he's going to deliver us from the Romans, we're going to, you know.
But they saw it from an earthly mission, and they thought he was going to be an earthly Christ. They didn't understand the higher
that's
of what
materialism.
he was.
That, and of course, how that changes within a week, crucify him almost, and then who do you choose? Barabbas. And we see that on a small scale today. You know, these populists, he's great, Putin, Trump, you know, and, you know, that's Barabbas in a sense. You're choosing the wrong one. You're choosing the wrong thing. You're given to believe that this is going to solve all your problems. You know, that's what these populists do. They go, they plead the lowest nature. This is I know what you want, and I can give it you. No, it's kind of because that's what they do. That's what they, and whereas the Christ being says, okay, Palm Sunday, but this is a hard task, and this is what you have to go through. But, you know, he always said, I never said it would be easy, but it would be worth it.
But the disciples, I think, expected it to be easy because they were just going to follow him. I don't think they realised they had to do the work as well. And at the Last Supper, before the Gethsemane, he was saying to them, do you understand me? And they all went, yeah. But he knew they didn't, so I felt that was a very lonely period for him. Yeah. You know, they've just said yes because they want to perhaps look as if they do understand, and also from an earthly point of view again, they were thinking it was all going to happen here and now, rather than in the working in themselves inside. They were looking for an outer.
No, it's interesting when you look at the three main examples. You've got Peter who denies, Thomas who doubts, Judas who betrays, and that's all in all of us. In all of us, we do all those things all the time, in a sense. And all the disciples had these particular positions, but that's the whole meaning of this is my blood, this is my body. You know that that begins to work into them. So after the resurrection, they start to take up and begin to understand, and then in the Pentecost, they really grasp it, and they become then these beings who have reached another level, and aspects of them reappear in history. I think the High Renaissance was a time when some aspects of St. Peter, Moses, even Noah, Tyler speaks about John the Baptist in Raphael, so and those will be going on. That looks at another great mystery that, and when incarnation gets very advanced, you can objectify your astral body, and you can give it to another being who's coming into incarnation as a sort of sacrificial gift, just as the higher creator beings gave parts of their being as the foundation for our particular world and universe. But this is now, way different from the mainstream concepts of today. But material. I mean, we're talking about the difference. I always talk about this materialism, acquisitional. I want to own things. It's just things I like, and conceptual materialism. But then there's something I call materiology, which is actually very interesting. Just to look at properties of matter, things that are here. There's flexibility, there's elasticity, there's malleability, ductility. There's the metals. What do? They conduct electricity better, or they conduct heat. All those. That's something we can really be interested in. Even just on that level, then we can go higher and deeper. That's really acknowledging. It's like the realist or the materialist and the spiritist. We do need that. Otherwise we can just be idealists, which is good, but you're still incomplete. And to look at the way matter is at the moment, how it is, to look at it and see its qualities and see what we can do with it. And Technosophy would start doing things with matter which would start changing its properties. Like water. Water is something that now people are perceiving it differently. Some, this Japanese guy who does patterns and all this, that sort of stuff. Yeah. And even shoulder-morphic resonance, and it does something to the material world.
Yeah, and I go with that because I've done them practices on my own when I first discovered his Masao Emoto, isn't it? And I used to write on my water bottle, a peace sign or a healing sign or something. I'm sure it wasn't in my mind. The water definitely tasted better.
Yeah. No, there's so many nuanced ways of doing that and working with that. When you bring your human thought into it. And it's so many qualities, very Goethean to see what's going on. And if you then take it into the living world, like for instance in a tree, the extraordinary processes that are going on in a tree, which is different from a building. You've got the root tips are growing, the apical buds are growing, and the width of all the branches is growing too, simultaneously. But of course the interesting thing is you have a branch on a tree at 6 foot. It'll always be at 6 foot. That's where it doesn't grow. It grows up at the top. It's getting higher.
Oh, but that upper branch stays there.
But that branch, the whole thing that's past, is only expanding, growing at the tips and at the tips. But what it is doing, the branch, is getting thicker. I noticed that when at Emerson College, when I used to swing on this branch. Can't do it now. It's massively thick. In the last couple of years, it's got really.
It's got fat.
Yeah, it's so interesting that, and of course all the different processes going on in a tree, where the surface is just under the surface is most alive in that sense, in the trunk. If you cut a strip around a tree, you can kill it because you're blocking the flow. The xylem and the phloem. The xylem that takes up the water and minerals, the phloem that brings down sugars and things to the fungi, but they are incredible, and to meditate and think about what's going on, that brings living thinking into action. So
and many people have had enlightenment under the trees,
absolutely.
Such as Buddha, and I know there's others.
Yeah.
Was it Newton was sitting under a tree when he had the old gravity idea?
Yeah.
So it's very good to sit under a tree as well.
Absolutely. But of course, Goethe famously said Newton could say why the apple falls, but he can't say how the apple got up there. I mean, that's it is really the living meditation is so. It's more beyond that. I mean, because it's more about multiplication rather than addition. Buildings you add. Whereas when you like equiangular, spiral, exponential growth is much closer to the living world. So, and these are all meditations. They all open one to the etheric, which will actually then open you to the divine eventually, as Blake would have said.
And this is what we're supposed to be working towards by doing these kinds of works and understanding what Steiner and such people were saying. And will you be talking about the technocracy, is that how you say it?
Technocracy.
At the weekend here at Steiner House in March. There's a weekend challenge of the times.
Yes, that's with Andrew.
Linnell.
Yes. I hope. Yeah, I've been asked to do that, so I will. It is a difficult one because I always say that it can't arise until the whole paradigm shifts. But what I would say, I hope it's not arrogant, but I would say is that having a thought about it, and I said this to Paul, it's not yet here, but it's now I brought it into human thought. That already begins to make a space. When you have certain thoughts that are in tune with the cosmos, the elementals will pick it up, and it does something to them, and that brings a bridge to the higher world. So everything starts with human consciousness, and gradually it will. I mean, you could say, what will it do? Will it solve the energy crisis? Well, that way of thinking, that paradigm, will make us relate to the Earth in a completely different way, so that we won't waste it, we won't destroy things in a certain way. We'll bring in whole new ways of understanding. It's only in the very early stages. What I'm trying to set up is inspirations which can receive how to work. I would say that, for instance, if you take the geometries of the Platonic solids and all the polyhedra, and they are like seed forms, they look very mineral, but actually out of them can grow the whole language. They're the vowels and consonants of a completely new language of form, because they create dynamics, and their relationship to music, and then we look at the periodic table. These are all things that will be foundational to the arising of Technosophy in a completely new way. And that is also connected with the rhythms of the seasons. We talk about sunsets, the 4 cardinal points, the constellations, when all those are acknowledged in a new way. Because what the purpose of Technosophy is not to hurl the products of our intellect blindly into space, what they call, but to bring down the cosmic wisdom as a fertilizing force to the earth, which this is when, and we speak to the stars and we're saying, can we bring down, Steiner said they withdrew, but then they will become active again, and we will be conversing with them and bringing forces down into the earth. It's also about, understanding across the threshold beings that are coming in and beings that are going out. Technosophy will create a climate where the perception of those processes will increase. So all that stuff is, but it's you can't just pin it down. Technosophy is when I get changes, because it's a whole paradigm change. But that means transcending the present materialistic concept of the 4 fundamental forces, all that stuff, which are fallen. They're real, but they're fallen. They're not to do with life.
So this is obviously, I think, very important, because I know a lot of people, especially the people that come to my channel, are trying to find what it is they're supposed to be doing, because they feel they have meaning to life, and we're a spiritual, soulful path. So if anybody has any questions or comments about this that me and Patrick, I can discuss with Patrick next time, please leave them in the comments or email me if you want to do it privately, and we can continue discussing this in our next show. But I want to thank you very much, Patrick, for coming on board. Hopefully people will see at Steiner House there's the Challenge of Our Times in March, so if you either look it up on the website or get their events book, when Patrick will be speaking along with Andrew Linnell, Ari Forrison, and I've forgotten the other guy, for somebody or other.
Is it Breslau?
No, Hammerston or something. Anyway,
yeah.
It's in March 2024.
Okay.
For those that are in the London area or want to come down to London, it's going to be a fantastic weekend. And thank you, Patrick, for coming and chatting today.
You're welcome. Okay.